At 9:04 a.m. on December 6, 1917, the north end of Halifax, Nova Scotia ceased to exist. 2,000 people died in the space of a breath. 9,000 more were injured. An entire district, houses, schools, churches, a rail yard, was flattened so completely that survivors later described standing in open air where their streets used to be. It was the largest man-made explosion in history, a record it would hold for 28 years, until the atomic bomb. The explosion lasted less than a second. The warning had been building for hours. Minutes earlier, a telegraph operator named Vince Coleman was sitting at his desk at the Richmond rail yard, a few hundred feet from the harbor. He was doing ordinary work on an ordinary Thursday morning when a colleague burst through the door with news that would change everything he did next. But to understand that decision, you have to understand what was already burning in the harbor. A French cargo vessel called the Mont Blanc had entered Halifax Harbor the previous evening and dropped anchor to wait for a convoy escort. On the surface, she looked like any other war-era cargo ship. 320 feet long, unremarkable. No markings to suggest anything unusual. Her crew knew she was a floating bomb. Her captain, Aimé Le Medec, knew she was a floating bomb. In her hold, 2,300 tons of picric acid, 200 tons of TNT, 10 tons of gun cotton. And on her deck, in metal drums, 35 tons of benzol, a highly flammable aviation fuel, enough explosive material to erase a city. But her cargo was classified. This was wartime. Revealing the nature of her hold, even to harbor authorities, would violate military secrecy protocols. So she moved through one of the busiest naval ports in the world. Convoy routes, warships, relief vessels, civilian traffic, carrying her secret. Nobody on shore knew what she was. That fact is the center of everything that happened next. Halifax in 1917 was the most important port in the North Atlantic. Every convoy heading from North America to Britain passed through here. Hundreds of ships moved through a narrow entrance channel called the Narrows, all coordinated through signals and timing. The system worked. Ships kept right going in, right going out. Pilots coordinated movement. Everyone followed the same rules. It worked because nothing like this had ever been introduced into it before. The ship that struck the Mont Blanc was called the Imo, a Norwegian relief vessel, carrying supplies to war victims in Belgium. A fueling delay had kept her in harbor overnight, and on the morning of December 6th, her captain was moving too fast, trying to make up lost time. The two ships exchanged navigation signals in the Narrows. Each captain believed the other would yield. Each correction brought them closer. The Imo turned to avoid a tugboat. The Mont Blanc turned to avoid the Imo. At 8:45 a.m., the Imo's bow scraped along the starboard side of the Mont Blanc. Low speed. Under almost any other circumstances, a minor incident. But the impact tore open the benzol drums on the Mont Blanc's deck. Fuel spilled across the wood planking. Metal ground against metal. A spark caught. The Mont Blanc was burning within seconds. Captain Le Medec ordered his crew to abandon ship immediately. They took to the lifeboats and rowed hard for the Dartmouth shore, as far from the ship as they could get. They did not sound a general alarm. They did not warn the city. Wartime secrecy rules were the framework Le Medec was operating inside. He believed the harbor signals he sent would be understood. He believed someone in authority would recognize the danger. Behind them, the Mont Blanc drifted on the harbor current, burning, moving toward Pier 6, directly into the most populated section of Halifax's north end. On the deck, the benzol burned hot. Shells in the cargo began cooking off, sending bright bursts of color through the black smoke. From shore, it looked like fireworks. At his desk in the Richmond rail yard, Vince Coleman heard the commotion and looked toward the harbor. He saw what everyone else saw, a burning ship, drifting slowly, spectacular against the gray December water. He didn't know yet what was inside her. This is the part that's hardest to think about. By 8:50 a.m., thousands of people had stopped what they were doing to watch. Factory workers left their machines and moved to the windows. School children pressed their faces against the glass. On Citadel Hill, people gathered at the overlook. In Richmond, the neighborhoods closest to the harbor, families came out of their houses and stood in the streets. Some children climbed onto rooftops for a better view. The fire was beautiful. The smoke column, the colored bursts from the cooking shells, the slow drift of the ship. Firefighters from Halifax Station Number 4 drove their truck to Pier 6 and began preparing to fight the fire. More responders were en route. Harbor officials were moving toward the scene. The situation felt like it was being handled. Everyone was moving closer. This wasn't a fire anyone could put out. Then a man came running to Vince Coleman's desk. He worked the harbor. He knew what was on the Mont Blanc. He told Coleman to run. Coleman looked at his telegraph key. There was a passenger train, the number 10, approaching Halifax on the main line. If it reached the Richmond station, everyone on board would be within range of whatever was about to happen. He could still make it out. There was still time. He sat back down and began to transmit. Munitions ship on fire, making for Pier 6. Goodbye. The Mont Blanc grounded at Pier 6 at approximately 9 a.m. She had been burning for 15 minutes. At 9:04, she detonated. The blast released energy equivalent to 2.9 kilotons of TNT. The pressure wave traveled outward at nearly 1,000 meters per second. The Richmond district, the wooden houses, the schools, the church, the rail yard, was destroyed instantaneously. The Mont Blanc was vaporized. Her 1-ton anchor was found 3 miles away. Windows shattered simultaneously across a 50-mile radius. Then the harbor moved. The force of the explosion displaced the water. A wave surged outward and struck both shores. Ships were thrown onto land. Buildings that had survived the initial blast were hit again, then pulled back as the water retreated and the pressure equalized. The people who had been watching, from windows, from rooftops, from the streets, were still watching when it happened. They had gathered from all over the harbor, drawn in by the fire, by the color, by the spectacle. It felt controlled, calm, almost peaceful. No alarms, no warnings, no sense that anything was wrong. They believed they were safe. Then the glass hit them. Hundreds were blinded instantly by their own windows, driven inward at the speed of the blast. The children at the school near the waterfront, the workers who had stepped closer, the families standing in the streets. They had all been watching. They had no way to know what they were looking at. The final count: approximately 2,000 dead, nearly 9,000 injured. Within hours, a blizzard arrived, one of the worst of the year, and rescue workers dug through snow and wreckage together. Relief trains came from across Canada. Boston responded so rapidly and so generously that Nova Scotia still sends a Christmas tree there every year in recognition. The north end of Halifax, Richmond, the neighborhoods closest to the harbor, never fully came back. The investigation that followed tried to assign blame. Numidek was charged. The harbor pilot was charged. The charges were eventually dropped or overturned. What the inquiry couldn't hold accountable was the system itself. The harbor had no mechanism for tracking hazardous cargo. Wartime secrecy rules ensured the most dangerous ship imaginable moved through one of the busiest ports in the world without warning. The firefighters who drove to Pier 6 had no idea what they were approaching. The signals worked. The rules were followed. Everyone did their job, and 2,000 people died. Vince Coleman died at his desk. The train he warned stopped in time. The passengers survived. He did not. He knew what was going to happen. He had a clear path out. He chose to stay because there was still something he could do. And he did it. And it killed him. The crowds on the waterfront had no such choice. They died watching something they had no way to understand. A burning ship drifting toward them on an ordinary Thursday morning, in a harbor that was working exactly as it was designed to work. No one failed. The system failed. And systems are not built to recognize the moment they become dangerous. Some disasters destroy cities in seconds. Others unfold slowly across years, one small decision at a time. Both begin the same way, with ordinary people in ordinary moments doing things that don't yet look like history. In the late 1800s, tens of thousands of orphaned children were loaded onto trains and sent west across America. They were placed on display in small towns, where strangers came to look them over and choose. Some of those children found families. Others disappeared into something very different. Next on Lore and Ruin, the orphan trains. Subscribe and you'll be there when it drops.